Government budgets serve many purposes in every country. First, to encourage growth, to redistribute income, as well as to help manage the economy in the short to medium term. As economists, we know that whenever government wants to influence the economy, they normally have two main tools at their disposal. We studied monetary policy, which normally falls under the ambit of the central bank to use interest rate to be able to usually influence the economy. The other policy tool, and very, very important one, is the fiscal policy, which we studied again in economics, and that normally falls under the ambit of the Minister of Finance. So I will be focusing on fiscal policy briefly, since the budget mainly is talking about fiscal policy. There were very few or almost nothing on monetary policy that the central bank would do. Fiscal policy is a tool in the hands of the finance minister, and it's normally used to influence the economy by changing the level and types of taxes, the extent and composition of spending, and the degree and form of borrowing. So these are the tools that fall under fiscal policy. Other government needs to use taxes by lowering taxes or increasing taxes, or by trying to influence or change the composition of government spending, resource allocations, and also government uses borrowing in a way to influence the private sector or the economic activities. I try to remember some of the macroeconomic things we learned in undergraduate studies. The basic Keynesian framework of macroeconomics is the concept of equilibrium, in which the gross domestic product is equivalent to aggregate demand. Aggregate demand being made up of consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. So basically, if we are looking at how the 2020 budget is going to impact on the private sector, we will need to look at how government in that budget is seeking to influence private consumption. And private consumption in Ghana constitutes a large share of economic activities in Ghana in terms of even our GDP. Can we find any tax policies or tax reforms that seeks to boost consumption? You would expect that government would have been reducing taxes if they wanted to spare up consumption, if they want to make households be able to have more disposable income in their pockets to spend in 2020. Or if government is of the view that the economy is heating up and there's too much money in the hands of people, government will be increasing taxes to try to mop up and reduce disposable income in the hands of individuals, or to try to reduce profits of businesses after government has taxed them by increasing corporate taxes, for example, or reducing corporate taxes if government felt that the economy needs to expand more so that companies can have more profit after tax. The other component of aggregate demand, which we expect the budget to influence, is private investment. You would expect government to do something that will increase investment, savings and investment, which are quite low, particularly private investment and private savings are quite low in our Ghanaian context. One of the critical tools the government has in its hand is our government himself or herself is a big spender in the economy. So basically, the component of aggregate demand that we call government spending or government expenditure is critical. Government uses procurement, uses purchases of goods and services. Government uses expenditures on the capital expenditure to try to also influence the private sector. And the last portion is export and import, or net export, which means we will expect in the budget to find some measures and strategies that are geared towards increasing net exports, basically increasing more exports and probably reducing import. But maybe we are talking about made in Ghana rice and consumption here and there. Basically, we need to find out. So basically, that's what I tried to do, but I will not cover all because I have just 10 minutes to do that. I focus on a few portions of this aggregate demand: consumption, private investment, government purchase of goods and services, and government expenditure on capital and infrastructure, and export and imports. This Keynesian framework is evidence that government can affect economic activity by controlling either G, which is the government expenditure, directly, or by influencing consumption, investment, and net export indirectly through taxes or transfers or spending. So government can either have tax reforms, or government can use transfers to households and to firms and individuals, or government can boost its own spending capacity in the 2020 year to be able to generate private sector activities. We have what we call expansionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy involves the situation in which government attempts to increase aggregate demand through either increases in government spending or reductions in taxes, and this lead to higher economic growth. We saw this in the 2017 budget. When I read the budget commentary in 2017 after the government's first budget was quite expansionary. They sought to increase government spending and sought to reduce taxes, a lot of what they call nuisance taxes. And basically that was from the background that for a few consecutive years, the economy was kind of contracting. We were entering into a situation of a recession. GDP growth had fallen from about 11%, and then we were now growing on average of about 3% for about 5 years. So it was quite rational that the government thought that, no, the economy was not doing well, and they wanted to spur economic activities by reducing taxes and by making sure that we have an expansionary fiscal policy. I think we commended government on that, and that resulted in a GDP growth of over 8% in 2017. And since then, we are beginning to see GDP growth coming down. And this year, they are forecast to have a GDP growth of about 7.6% thereabout, which we are not sure the government will be able to meet. But what should government do in a situation like that? Expansion policy can do this by increasing consumption, if we have the right policies in the budget, by raising disposable income through cuts in personal income taxes, or by increasing investment, by raising after-tax profits through cuts in business taxes, or by increasing government purchases through increased spending on final goods and services. The role of expansionary fiscal policy gained a lot of prominence during the recent global economic crisis. You remember in 2008, 2007, 2009, the whole global economy suffered from the global crisis. And right from the Obama time, and many governments began to reduce taxes and begin to use a lot of transfers to give to households and businesses. Basically, the economy, to avoid recession, government wanted to spur economic and private activity, and that's what they used. And that became quite popular. Several governments did that to jumpstart the economy and also to mitigate the impact of the crisis on the vulnerable groups in the country. In hard times like this, the Minister of Finance would try to strike a balance between different objectives, in particular, either to create more revenues and avoid the adverse effects on economic growth, or to try to increase spending and transfers so that we can have more money in the hands of the private sector to generate growth. The opposite of the expansionary fiscal policy, of course, is contractionary fiscal policy. which will be the situation where government think the economy is overheating, and the government will therefore increase taxes in order to try to reduce the money in the hands of the private sector and businesses. And sometimes that leads to a reduction in economic growth. So for the 2020 budget, I've just given a context, just a free lecture on the introductory intermediate macroeconomics. But what do we see in the 2020 budget? I first look at resource allocation. The total expenditure, including arrears, for the 2020 budget is projected at 85.9 billion Ghana cedis, which is about 21.6% of GDP. The estimate for 2020 represents a growth of 21% above the projected outturn of 2019. So this looks like it's good news. Okay? So government is growing expenditure by about 21%, which means that the government is seeking to expand the economy, is seeking to put more money in the hands of the private sector. Government is going to spend 85.9 billion Ghana cedis. Well, we can discuss about whether this will be achievable or not. Some of us, we have our doubt, given the track record of government over the last 3 years of mixing almost all the revenue targets, and given that the 2019 expenditure target was not achieved, the big jump of 21.2%, we can debate about it. But let's assume, without admitting that this is possible and this is going to be achievable, then it looks like this is good news. The key drivers of this expenditure growth include the wage bill. In terms of government paying wages and salaries to public sector workers, government is going to spend about 23 billion Ghana cedis, which constitutes about 26.7% of government projected spending. Government is going to spend about 21.7 billion Ghana cedis in interest payment, interest on our debt stock. And government is going to spend about 1 billion for the 2020 elections, for the Electoral Commission. So if you look at government expenditure, how much government is going to spend for 2020, out of the nearly 86 billion Ghana cedi, you can see that more than half is just going to pay salaries and wages for people, and that's not free money. That's payment for people working. That's reward to labor. So we cannot say that is money that you're putting in people's pocket. Then government is going to use about 22 billion to pay debt. Again, that is not money you're putting in people's pocket. That's interest for money you have borrowed. So that leaves just roughly about 40%. And that 40%, actually, some are going to go to amortize debt, and some are going to go into the elections for next year. So we will need to now begin to analyze how much really is going to be available for the private sector. My analysis of the 2020 budget, unlike the 2017 budget and even the 2018 budget, which was mainly anchored on a strong fiscal stimulus or an expansionary fiscal policy, the 2020 budget is quite neutral. I read the budget several times to find out what is the philosophy behind the budget. I wanted to find out whether the government is trying to seek an expansionary policy or a contractionary policy. And I found that the government is playing a draw game. The government is not in this budget trying to slow down the economy, neither are they trying to really boost the economy. I think it's a very cautious budget. One was expecting a more bold budget, given the challenges that we have, and I'll talk about a few of them, and given that we are going into an election. given that over the last 3 years of this government, we have not seen significant improvement in infrastructure, despite all the attempts to do that. It looks as if infrastructure investments have been kept for 2020. From all indications as I travel across our roads and as we hear from the Afrobarometer report, infrastructure is a key need for this country as a middle-income country if we are going to really develop. I expected to see a very bold budget statement. I expected to see an attempt to raise more domestic revenue to spend. I expected to see that the expenditure of 85.9 billion, actually I was expecting something more than that. I think government is trying to work within the fiscal deficit that we have set for ourselves, for 5%, and the government is trying to have 4.7%. As Director said, whether that will be achievable or not, we live to see. But actually, I think this budget did not give me too much hope. If you look at the Minister of Finance projection and you divide how much government is willing to spend, the 85.9 billion cedis, over the 30 million population of Ghana, government is trying to put in everybody's pocket about 2,800 Ghana cedi for 2020. So that's roughly about the per capita or per person expenditure. And this is what government is going to use to buy goods and services, to pay for electricity, to build infrastructure and repair your roads, to pay for health, education, and everything, and even to service debt. 2,800 Ghana cedis. That is something that I think households and individuals and the private sector may not be jubilating about. One of the things that normally will spur growth and also boost the private sector is government spending on infrastructure, what we call the capital expenditure. The Minister of Finance himself noted in paragraph 298 of the budget, he said, and I quote, "Mr. Speaker, all over the world, infrastructure development has been the bedrock for economic development and an avenue for wealth creation," unquote. Ken Ofori-Atta 2020 budget. So the government already knows that infrastructure is key. It's key for development, it's key for wealth creation, it's key for the private sector. And the minister notes on paragraph 299, and I quote, he said, "Mr. Speaker, the challenges in the road sector is enormous," unquote, Ken Ofori-Atta 2020 budget. So the minister also notes that Ghana has a very serious, enormous challenge with the road sector, including my area where I live in Adenta. And from the western region in Takwa area, where all the cocoa and the gold is coming from. This morning, CTFM was doing a very serious discussion about the roads, the western corridor. I traveled last weekend for a funeral all the way to Nzimade. The roads are bad. And all the oil and the gas and the gold and everything is coming from that road. All the Takoradi roads from Takoradi going to my village is terrible. So this is something that is all over the country, actually, to be honest with you. Even the roads in the cities where we live, they have become very inaccessible after the rains. So it's heartwarming that the minister himself has taken note of that. Infrastructure is critical for economic and social development all over the world. At the very most basic level, people need clean water, safe drinking water for cooking, power for lighting and productive activities, roads and railways, which will allow people to get to work and provide for their families, transport infrastructure, seaports, airports, all over. allows firms and private sector to reach the markets they need to trade their goods and services. In these ways, and many more, infrastructure is vital to the quality of life and economic development. Infrastructure affects economic growth in two central ways: by directly boosting economic activity and underpinning productivity. If government spends on infrastructure, activities will be boosted. People will get jobs. There will be demand for goods and services, all of that. Also, infrastructure, by simply constructing and operating new or upgraded infrastructure, supports economic activity by boosting demand and by creating jobs. Also, infrastructure underpins productivity throughout an economy. Good quality roads and railways, for example, make it easier, cheaper, and faster to transport goods and people, facilitating trade and investment. Reliable electricity, water, and telecoms infrastructure enable firms to function efficiently and without disruption. We did a study on the impact of the Doomsaw, and the impact was massive. I think the Kufuor government used that study, ISAT did, as part of their campaign, because we show how much we're losing on a daily basis from the Doomsaw and how many jobs were lost, all of that. And infrastructure is very key, even electricity. All this means that even the most advanced economies, if infrastructure capacity does not increase in line with economic and demographic growth, it can instead act as a drag on economic growth. It is therefore heartwarming, as I saw in the budget, that the minister is promising to accelerate infrastructure development in 2020. I saw signs that they are going to spend some money on railway development. I saw some road infrastructure going to be coming under the phase 1 of the Sino-Hydro loan. About 10 projects have been listed there: Thermal Interchange, Kumasi, Inner Road, Sunyani, Inner City Roads. So that's good news. I saw that there are some activities going on under the Infrastructure for Poverty Eradication Program. There's going to be some infrastructure in water and sanitation. Some are going to be spent on fish landing sites, etc. The minister said, and I quote him, "We will accelerate financing for infrastructure by actively leveraging innovative sources of finance. To this end, we are strengthening the capacity of the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund and to tap into global financial market." Ken Ofrata, 2020 budget. So this is heartwarming. However, when I look into the budget and to look at the resources that have been allocated for this infrastructure development that will benefit the private sector, I was quite disappointed. I saw that the government has earmarked just about 9 billion Ghana cedis for all the infrastructure activities for 2019. Actually, it's 9.3 billion, or 10% of the projected expenditure. Only 10% of the 85 billion the government is going to spend will go into this critical sector of infrastructure. And on per capita basis, it means each one of us, every Ghanaian is going to have 310 Ghana cedi to develop infrastructure. 310 per capita for everybody in Ghana to fix your road, to fix the hospitals, to fix water, sanitation, all of that. That is definitely on the low side. Plus the fact that this is likely to be reduced if the government is not able to raise the domestic revenue. As the data said, it is the portion of government budget that is always sacrificed when government does not meet its revenue target. The 2019 budget for infrastructure was almost halved. So the 2020 budget, maybe because it's an election year, we pray that it will not be reduced. Actually, that we will exceed the target. But just to let you know that in terms of infrastructure development, there's not much that government is seeking to spend. Why is government not adopting an expansionary fiscal policy or trying to spend more on infrastructure. And I think that's where I'll be concluding. I'll skip some of my sections because the data has already talked about it. But I think it's because in the budget, I did not see any bold attempt for government to raise revenue. I was quite disappointed that on the revenue side, government has decided only to renew and extend the National Fiscal Stabilization Levy and the special import levies for another 5 years to support the budget. Government decided to maintain the increase in the communication service tax that they increased to 9% in the media budget review, and the energy sector levy to support development of a viable technology ecosystem in the country and help bridge the financing gap on the downstream oil sector. That's all we see. I did not see bold attempt to broaden the tax bracket. I did not see bold attempt to bring in the private, the informal sector. I did not see bold attempt to tax the rich or to increase or to tax properties. I honestly don't even know why they introduced the luxury tax and they withdrew it. And I checked the budget to see how much was raised, and I couldn't even put my hand on the finger. It's like there was about 60 million Ghana cedi that was raised for all of that thing. So I realized that that is one of the challenges that we are facing in this budget. Government revenue is not bold, and therefore we cannot spend what we don't have. And I think that is what we need to discuss as a country. How do we ramp up domestic revenue? I was with the Minister of Finance and the GRA last week at La Paz, and I suggested to them that they should talk to the Ghana Statistical Service, because my reading of the Ghana Statistical Service industrial integrated business establishment study that they did, the IBES 2 report shows that Ghana Statistical Service was able to identify over 600,000 non-household business establishments. Over 600,000. These are businesses that are not in household. They are on the streets, you can find them. And they were able to find them, to interview them. And they sampled 31,000 of those businesses, and they did the IBES 2. And from that, they were able to realize that in 2013 fiscal year, these businesses were generating over nearly 500 billion Ghana cedis. So then I said, okay, fine. If government was supposed to even tax them, just 10% tax, not just don't do the corporate, just tax, or don't collect income taxes from any of us. Just go to these businesses and tax them at 10%. We will achieve our tax revenue target for 2020. So it means that the potential to raise revenue is here if we are going to have revenue tax administration and we really mean business to tax them. These businesses are there, they are registered. The Ghana Statistical Survey has a database, they are there. It means that we are not even raising a lot of revenue from corporate side, talk less of the many informal businesses that are around and even for many people who don't pay. So I feel that if government will be bold enough in 2020 and beyond, we can raise more revenue domestically, and therefore we can spend more to put a lot of money in the pockets of individuals. Maybe I should conclude where the director concluded. The government said they have put 12.4 billion in the pockets of Ghanaians. That is not something that we can contest. As Dudley said, it depends on whether you receive it or not. But supposing that every Ghanaian received that, that would just be about 413 Ghana cedi per Ghanaian per year, or 1 Ghana cedi per day in the pocket of every Ghanaian. I don't know whether that is something that we should be singing hallelujah about. But in conclusion, one of the things I thought the budget was a bit silent about, and yet is going to affect private sector individuals greatly, was the challenge that we've been having with the financial sector. just like most financial crises, this financial sector challenge that we are having since 2007, 2018 is going to manifest greatly in 2020. My own estimation shows that it's going to really have a slowing down effect on the economy if government doesn't act quickly. It's going to lead to a credit crunch and lead to a fall in consumption and lead to a fall in investment, and therefore that will contract aggregate demand. Now remember the equation of aggregate demand: consumption, investment, and government spending, and export and import. And many, many, many individuals and businesses have lost capital, they have lost investment. So consumption, aggregate demand is going to fall in 2020 unless something seriously is done about it. Consumption is going to reduce, savings and investments are going to reduce, and that's really going to affect profits of businesses, and there's going to be job losses here and there. So we need to do what normally is done in other countries when we have such challenge. We cannot just keep it under the carpet. It's massive. It's unprecedented in my short life in Ghana, studying the economy of Ghana. So we would like to see, because this financial sector is like an electricity grid, it's a network. So any failure on one element of it is going to create pressure on the other side. And as it happens, almost everybody is going to suffer. Some of us who sit here and say we don't have investment anywhere, we are going to remit money to people who are affected. So nobody is going to be free from this situation. So we expect that government policy has to ramp up. There has to be a discussion. There's not been a lot of discussion. I don't know why Ghanaians are like that. We have to demand accountability. What has failed is regulation. It's government that has failed and is responsible for this. The reason why government is there is because we know that markets fail. And if markets fail, government must not fail. Because when government fails, in addition to market failure, it's a double failure. So markets are failing, and yet the regulators that were supposed to regulate these institutions to make sure that depositors' money were safe, they also failed woefully. Until today, I have not seen how people have got their money from Men's Gold or from GoCo Security or from all the microfinance institutions and all the challenges that we have been having. I felt that we need to have a national discussion about this. I went to the Securities and Exchange Commission's website to find out what have they been doing about that. And I saw that some of the things I saw was very annoying. You will see that these institutions that collapsed, 53 of them, they have been showing signs of collapsing for a long time. And they have not been adhering to the regulations that govern them, according to the Securities and Exchange Commission themselves. And they have not really acted quickly enough. When some of them did not submit their placement report, like First Bank Financial Services, last year, they charged them, the punishment was 100 Ghana cedi. So if a whole bank fails to submit what they're supposed to submit, and you charge them 100 Ghana cedi, how much do you charge somebody for crossing red light? I understand. So a bank, a financial institution is collecting people's money and is supposed to report to the regulator, and is not reporting. And when the regulator is going to punish, you say, I charge you 100 Ghana cedi. And because they know 100 Ghana cedi, they consistently were not submitting their report. They are charging 100, 300 Ghana cedi. And all of that has led to this situation we have. Government cannot absorb itself, and it's not talking about MPP government. This has been going on for years. So we need to bring all of those governments to book, and we need to hold the owners of these institutions accountable. And if people have to face the law, they have to face the law. But they're going to prison is not what we are looking for. Government needs to find a way of making sure that people can get their money back. If they cannot get their money back, then it's going to affect 2020 outcomes. Remember that the budget 2020 is about consolidating the gains of growth, jobs, and prosperity for all. I cannot see prosperity for all and jobs for all in a situation like that, when thousands of people have lost their retirement, their lifetime investment, and we are sitting down as if these are normal times. I expected the budget to be more bold. I expected money to be sent to go and solve this problem for people to get. If that means we need to increase our budget deficit a bit, so be it. The consequence of that is that it's going to reduce consumption, reduce investment, reduce profits, joblessness, and of course, my social colleagues will be doing the social impact of the financial crisis. It's going to be suicide, it's going to be depression, it's going to be marriage breakdown, it's going to be many other things. So at Easter, these are some of the things that we need to look at. With that, I conclude that the budget 2020 has mixed information. There are some aspects of it that definitely are going to enhance private sector, both in terms of households through spending, and both in terms of household through consumption, but also businesses through government attempt to ramp up infrastructure development. But definitely, I think it is not sufficient. Thank you very much.